Welcome, and thank you all for being here. Thanks for joining us to celebrate the publication of JoAnne McFarland's American Graphic. I'm Christopher Nelson. I am the publisher and editor at Green Linden Press, a nonprofit poetry press based in Grinnell, Iowa. We're dedicated to fostering excellent poetry and giving a portion of proceeds to reforestation. To date, we have planted 800 trees. Any writers in the audience, I want to make you aware that we are currently reading submissions for our chapbook open reading period and poetry submissions for our biannual journal called Under a Warm Green Linden. You can visit our website for more information about that. And if you're available this evening and hungry for more poetry at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, you can join us for a reading of Federico Garcia Lorca's poetry, translated by Rebecca Seiferle, a new book out called The Dream of Apples, for which Rebecca won the Stephen Mitchell Prize for Excellence in Translation. I'll put a link to that as well as a link to JoAnne's book in the chat in just a bit. So for today's event, JoAnne will give a short reading followed by a conversation, which I will moderate. I'll ask a few questions and then I'll invite you to join the conversation. Looking forward to it. Thank you again for being here. JoAnne McFarland is a multidisciplinary artist, writer, and curator. She's the artistic director of Art Poetica Project Space in Gowanus, Brooklyn, which exhibits works that focus on the intersection of language and visual representation. Her poetry collections include A Domestic Lookbook and Pullman, both published by Grid Books, Identifying the Body, and Tracks of My Tears, both published by The Word Works, and Acid Rain, published by Willow Books. Today she'll be reading from American Graphic, just published by Green Linden Press. It was the winner of the Wishing Jewel Prize for Poetic Innovation. A book described by Aracelis Girmay as, quote, a field of marks and feelings, quite impossible to describe, minimalist yet dense, a thicket of sparse reckoning, out of which beauty is pulled to the surface with muscle and voice, color and hand. Dynamic and exacting, McFarland's is a brilliant singular vision. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome JoAnne McFarland.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that introduction. And thank you to everyone for being part of this talk. I'm just delighted to be here to have a chance to talk about this work. American Graphic is the third book in a trilogy, and I would like to especially thank Elizabeth Murphy, the editor-in-chief of Grid Books, for publishing Pullman and A Domestic Lookbook in such stellar editions. Those are the first two books in the trilogy. And I am overjoyed to have received this year's Wishing Jewel Prize. And Chris, I have to tell you, it has had actually a talismanic effect over this entire year. And working with you has just been a complete joy. I've loved our collaboration from the very beginning to this moment. And thank you for being so open to my suggestions, and having so many wonderful ideas of your own. So my entire studio practice is based on my belief that violence and creativity are opposites. I've looked at these two forces almost as a physicist might, in order to understand how they work. And I believe that creativity can be leveraged to manage and even overcome times of great threat like this time. American Graphic is my testament to the power of making to provide a way through. I will read work from each of the three sections in American Graphic: sampler, ingredients, and accounts. So American Graphic opens with a prescient epigraph by Bell Hooks. Then sampler describes a girl's early life where many of us will recognize that collisions between our hungers and internal and external threats begin. The reader knows this familiar poetic form. There's a title, a few lines, and vivid imagery that depicts a budding awareness. So this is the epigraph by Bell Hooks. And I noticed that all around me I heard testimony that lovelessness had become the order of the day. I feel our nation's turning away from love as intensely as I felt love's abandonment in my girlhood. Turning away, we risk moving into a wilderness of spirit so intense we may never find our way home again. Sampler, plate. The birthplace of my imagination was my supper plate. That moon that illuminated everything else. Its smooth, meticulous architecture, so simple, designed for one thing only, to bear warm or cool rages. I stared at it for hours. My mother thought I felt shame as I studied whatever she'd ordered me to swallow this time grow harder, more beautiful, more strange. Appetite. When I fall asleep, my fairy tale begins somewhere else, someplace I can't quite reach yet. Awake in this world, so many faces are broken in two pieces. I slump in front of the TV with my brother. People boogaloo or point guns. Our mother curls on the couch, smoking. As far as I can tell, she's never held enough. White Castle. We skip across 4 lanes of traffic to reach the White Castle. My brother holds my hand. Cars roar past. Our eyes track the bully colors. Bringing back enough for everyone will be easy. She jotted it down on a scrap. While we're gone, ashtrays fill with butts. No one listens to the sirens. Slaughterhouse. We visit a slaughterhouse to learn how it works. The feather inside me won't be quiet. He promises not one thing will be harmed in the demonstration. He explains it all while chasing his breath. His red beard is neat. At 15, he lost his teeth to a fearsome kick. Now he knows just where to thrust. Origami. One day I'll turn myself into a crane. The book shows how. Jumping frog, swan, butterfly, lotus flower. It comes with rainbow papers trimmed to the right size. I'm unsure of the steps, but I've still got time. I practice the folds. Each day I do just what I'm told. When she comes home, she kicks off her heels. Height. I spend all afternoon making the tail. I tie each knot. My dreams flutter between acts. Dreams are just wishes in color. I am not a puzzle to be solved. In the ingredients section, I demystify the process of creating poems by showing my original draft in a call and response with Melinda Russell's recipes from a domestic cookbook, the first known cookbook by a Black woman in the United States. The draft reads the way a list of ingredients for a recipe might. What then follows is a streamlined poem or meal. In this way, I show that creativity belongs to all of us and can be accessed by everyone. Ingredients. I had made cooking my employment for the last 20 years. In the first families of Tennessee, my native place, Virginia, North Carolina, and Kentucky. I know my receipts to be good as they have always given satisfaction. I have been advised to have my receipts published as they are valuable and every family has use for them. Use. Every woman has a use. Every woman has a fuse. A woman who refuses must still eat. A refusal to eat is a death sentence. A sentence puts death in order. A meal is a promise of care made from yolks. A woman is expected to care. Not every family has use for a woman who wants more. Sometimes a series of bites swallows everything. Every woman has a tongue. Her appetite can be a death sentence. A sentence is a system of yolks. A woman is expected to yield, to never want more. Some bites swallow fields. Washington cake. 3 cups sugar, 6 eggs, 1 cup butter, 1 cup sour milk, 1 teaspoon soda, 3 cups flour, 1 teaspoon cream tartar. Flavor with lemon to your taste. Sour. These days are sour, from waking to sleep that doesn't fit. We lurch through time and space as if we had dimension. We take ourselves apart in each room to stay one step ahead of the bombs. Bombs they take no responsibility for, as if we destroy ourselves, as if we hadn't already destroyed so much we believe in. We make out our paths in each other's faces, but no future hovers there. I take myself apart in your arms, one step ahead of the bombs. Bombs they take no responsibility for, as if we destroy ourselves. These days are sour. We lurch through nights without sleep, as if time still had dimension. The past glows in our eyes, but no future. Chow chow. 1 peck green tomatoes, half a dozen peppers, 1 dozen onions, grated horseradish, chop and scald in salt and water, drain in a sieve, put into jars and pour spiced vinegar over it. over it. I move the sky to the left, the ocean to the right. I wrap my voice around each name they gave you with such faith in who you could be. I can find the pain in anything. Some gods appear out of nowhere just to wound us. You appear out of smoke. Wrap me in your arms. Stroke my throat with your breath. You've given me everything. In accounts, the final section, I show two kinds of accounts, pairing posters by those seeking to recover runaway slaves with notes from a woman actively in pursuit of her own pleasure. In this way, accounts addresses the central theme of American Graphic, how to use the threats around us as catalysts for connection and joy. Accounts. $100 reward. Ran away from the subscriber's farm near Washington on the 11th of October. Negro woman Sophia Gordon, about 24 years of age, rather small in size, of copper color, is tolerably good looking, has a low and soft manner of speech. She is believed to be among associates formed in Washington, where she has been often hired. I will give the above reward no matter where taken and secured in jail, so that I can get her again. George W. Young, November 16, 1858. By the way, how exactly does one get to the ocean? If one were a city gal dying for a look at waves, a splash of salt from standing too close to said waves, a gal without a bike, but who has a powerful will and a Metro card, how might one do that? One day, or better yet, one day at dusk, I would love to see the ocean through your eyes. Thank you.
Thank you, JoAnne. What a pleasure to hear the poems in your voice.
Thanks so much, Grace.
Well, and thank you also for your, I was taking notes as you were talking. There are a lot of things that I would like to have a little conversation about. Let me see if I can pull some of these ideas together. So for those who haven't seen the book, it, in addition to the poetry, there's a lot of visual artwork that JoAnne has made throughout. So on one side there will be the poem, and on the other maybe a collage or a needlepoint, or some graphic of some kind, right? It's really lovely. Uh, but for me, there's this interesting tension. I think of it almost as like an aesthetic irony, in that we have these feminist themes, we have these emancipatory themes, and they're interwoven with needlepoint, collage, art forms that I've always sort of associated with hobby and domesticity. And I don't mean to sound kind of condescending there, but you rarely see needlepoint in a museum, right? It's often associated with domesticity and things
Mm.
one might do at the home. It's not really the art that makes it out into the world and changes, people's perceptions of culture or whatever. So I'm curious about um, that tension that you've made there, um, and if that sort of triggers any ideas you want to talk about.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I did want to thank you so much for showing the art in the book. And I do have some pieces here that I wanted so that people could see what these actual pieces look like, the size of them and the bead work on them for those. And then these are the collages that I made for the sampler section. And this is sewing pattern tissue actually and rice paper. And then this is one of the dress collages so that people have a
Oh,
sense of the
good.
size of the work.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just love doing them. And that question is so fascinating to me because I think that part of it is, first of all, that I always follow my instinct, whatever makes me feel good or right or in the right space, joyful, calm. That's the work that I want to be doing, however that happens. So I'm not so much thinking of what's going to be part of the culture or work for the culture, especially since I think about the culture around us as so threatening and hostile. So I'm often working, I think of myself as very countercultural. I'm often working against messages that I am receiving from outside. So with a lot of the beadwork in particular, but a lot of the work that I'm attracted to and the work that I do, I'm looking for something that I can savor, something that's meditative, something that's slow, because I think that we're encouraged so often to do things quickly, to not pay attention, to rush, and that big and loud is better, makes more of an impression. And that's not the space that I find the most nourishing, which goes back to the central theme of the book. What is identifying your own appetite and then following that in order to stay healthy and full and joyful and giving? What are those things? And I have found throughout my life that I've had to invent that for myself with help from my friends and people that I love. But it's almost like work that is done in opposition to many of the messages that I see around me. So I think that that is why my work has that intimate, slow, tiny, small. I think small things can actually be incredibly powerful and explosive.
Mm,
And I find that the domestic realm, when it is managed, as my studio space is I designed it as the safest place on earth. When it is managed, it is the ultimate creative vessel. And that's what interests me more than anything else.
wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for explaining that. You I mentioned in the introduction that American Graphic is part of a trilogy, right? That Grid Books brought out Pullman and a domestic lookbook. Can you talk about that, the set of three, and maybe how they're similar, what the unifying elements might be, and but how American Graphic might be different? Or do you imagine perhaps a fourth installation? Or is it indeed a closure here of the trilogy?
Okay, well, I don't. envision a fourth. I kind of like it as a trilogy. It just seems that once we got to this volume, that it's like, okay, that's complete. But in thinking about that question, I think that the trilogy holds together from that very, very first line in Pullman. And I went back and looked at it today, and it says the first line is, "Don't break into this poem." And I think the trilogy rests on that idea that creativity is a sacred activity, that we each have that ability to be creative, and that it has its own time and space and ways. It's magic. And if we can allow ourselves to lose control and let go and let things happen and not be afraid, then we can be part of what transpires and what is created. We can do that. And I think that part of, again, going back to this thing about, well, what do we choose to make? I make things that help me, put me in a state where I can be receptive and unguarded and allow things to happen. And that's a practice. That's something that I have to actually work to create for myself every day, because I feel and I observe that a lot of other people also feel a kind of anxiety from the culture around me. And I use my art and my practice as a type of meditation and a way of calming myself down enough to be receptive. And the trilogy in each one of the three volumes in some way speaks to that, of being, of using the past. So all three volumes have used historical material, but in different ways. And for me, the exercise is, how playful can I be? What can I do with this material? In fact, the cookbook appears in both a domestic lookbook and American Graphic. Using that material and being in conversation with someone else, someone who isn't here physically anymore, but whose work is so alive and whose work I want to enliven. So those are the things that all three volumes have in common: a way of being, of carrying a thread of receptivity through, and a way of showing that that can be a practice and a way of living.
Thank you. That's inspiring. It makes me want to go create something.
Good.
Truly. Maybe I'll ask one more question, and then we can open it up to see what other people would like to talk about. I'd like to bring our attention to the cover of the book, which I know some of you have seen, but, and ask you. You mentioned that the central theme, or a central theme, of the book is how to use these threats and this anxiety about potential violence in our surroundings, how to use those as catalysts for connection and catalysts for finding joy. And I'm curious if you can sort of talk about the cover in that context.
Let's see.
I mean, it's a picture of you in your youth, right?
Yes, in front of an American flag when I was 3 years old. And I think that one of the things I think about a lot, and I can't say it as a statement because I don't want to say it declaratively, but it's an idea. But one of the things that I observe about American culture in particular is that, because I think of creativity and violence as opposites, the United States is an extraordinarily creative place as well. Just absolutely extraordinary. And I think that it's not accidental that our culture can be so magnificently creative, and it is also extremely violent. I wonder if it's possible for these two things to both not have to be true, but they are certainly true now. They are certainly true now. I knew the way I identify with that picture of myself is that I knew even as a small girl what felt good for me and how being creative and being in a creative space and how intimate that was. That was something that was hugely important for me personally, but that was also threatening. And I didn't understand why, and I still don't understand why. I almost think that it goes back to, again, when you talk about domesticity, and that it's not necessarily looked down upon, but it's not necessarily what's out there as lauded. That kind of intimacy and in the home and privacy and what we're telling ourselves hour to hour and day to day, that all of that matters hugely to me. And I think it matters more than anything else. It's the foundation for everything else. And so even when I was very small, I knew that that was true. And my life has kind of been a way of showing in action that that is true. It certainly is true for me. And so I think of that image as showing me almost trapped in this environment that is hostile to me. And what am I going to do about that? How am I going to survive that? And I think of that as part of being Black in America, being female in America, but it's part of other experiences as well. That's the one that I have wrestled with.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for exploring that, not only um, in your answer, but also, for making art of that lived experience, art that we can then all benefit from and enjoy and be inspired by. Looks like Greta has a question or a comment here in the chat. Um, she would love some insight on the two versions of sour, and maybe I'll just contextualize that a little bit. In the ingredients section, the poems, they're either in two parts or there are two poems that borrow or share lines, depending on how you think of it, right? And that's you described it as a call and response. Am I correct, JoAnne?
Yes. So I take something from Melinda Russell's recipe. In that case, it was the word sour was there. And then I created a draft of a poem and then the final poem. What I don't know how it will feel to readers, but what I was doing in that section, the ingredient section, was imagining the experiences of people who are going through all of the global chaos that we are experiencing and how Western civilization and how we have arrived at this point and all of the warfare and hatred and violence that is erupting around us. And so in the ingredients section in particular, I was imagining the experience that many, many people may be having in this moment. And sour is one of those pairings. Greta, does that answer what you wanted to know? I can't hear her.
Yeah,
Now I'm unmuted.
there you
Um,
go.
so it, it, you know, having it not be visual and having it be what you're reading, that I was following the images, and then it felt like there was the other version, and you had talked about kind of like there's the ingredients and then you get to the full meal. And the second one felt like a very satisfying meal, and the first one did feel more jumbled in a way, like image, but then when I heard the second one, it was like, oh, right. And there were things that were in different order. And so I just I guess I wanted some insight on how you went from there to there. That it was like, oh, right. Oh, this just the feeling of it was like, ah, yes, right. But I didn't understand why I had such a different reaction to the two, how I experienced it was two versions. And it felt like, okay, how did you get from here to there? That's kind of my question, right?
Oh, I love that. So that goes back to what I was saying about I I hope that that section in particular is a way of showing that this is something that belongs to all of us. That the second version is like a song for me. It's like a song. It's like how does one write a song? But that draft is saying, I'm not going to write a song. I don't know where I'm going to end up. I'm just going to free associate. We can all do that. We can all do that, right? I'm going to take something from here. We can all free associate, just write something down, something, and then take that. And you and I might make something completely different, but we both understand the editing process, right? We understand what it means to take something and then edit it down to be whatever it is you as an artist or as a maker who's determining what the end result is going to be. We know how to get, we so often get that thing at the end that we're befuddled as to how to get there. And that's exactly what I want to demystify. Because if we can do that, then more of us can do it. We won't be intimidated. And I guess that's the point for me, that if we need to leverage creativity, we have to find out how we're going to do that. And we don't want to be intimidated by it. We want to feel that it's something that we can do. So that is the point of showing the draft. And I'm not trying to make it look pretty. I'm just, going. And then say, okay, well, given my aesthetic sense, where am I going to end up? And so each one of those works like that. And I do want it to feel, it's just like if you are going to have a really great meal, right? You're going to get this gorgeous, and you might just taste a little tiny bit of, you'll say, is that so and so and so and so? And it might just be a little smidgen of something that's in there, but it's critical. So I wanted it to work in exactly the same way, because I honestly don't make that much of a distinction between a great meal or a needlepoint or a poem.
Nice.
So one way I can understand, making a link to the other thing you said about having to work to create a place of safety, because violence creates a defense, right? And
Mhm.
so to be in a place of safety. So in a way, what I'm hearing you say is I'm wanting to invite people into the place of creation as a place of safety, and that judgment as the defense about, is it a beautiful poem? Is it not? Is it real art, or is it just merely domestic? That place of judgment as a defense, which is also a response to violence and threat, that what you're doing by showing that process is to say, come in, you can be in this place of safety that's not judgment. Look, it's like when you said, do I put the ocean over here and the mountain over here, or something like that, that it's not, it's I don't know, demystifying is not exactly the right word, but it's changing it from a place of, look at this, this is a defense, this is saying this is right, this is it, and being able to say, well, no, actually, here's all my crayons, and I played with them this way, but here's, you could take your crayons and put them this way. And that, to me, that relates emotionally to what you're saying about finding that, about having to work at, about not just reacting to violence with defense, but coming to a place of sanctuary, maybe, right? So I don't know, that my brain was just going all over the place with the things that you were saying. So anyway, that's does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. Thank you, Greta. Let me bring in a couple of others, because there are some more questions in the chat. And I think this one, Greta, builds upon or is connected directly to what you were saying. This question from Catherine. Based on what you said regarding the cover of the book, do you feel that art can change the way one feels and ultimately the way one thinks? Can you change the violence in the world, even to a small extent?
Absolutely. Oh, I absolutely profoundly believe yes. In fact, I think that that's one of the challenges that we are facing right now. And that's why I think it, if we can understand that violence and creativity will often exist together, we can leverage creativity much more effectively. And I think that's the challenge right now. Because we have this opportunity to create stronger communities. And with, as Greta was saying, with less judgment, if we can, and more safety, yes. It is so true that when I created my studio space, that I was intentionally creating the safest place on earth. I did that very intentionally because I think of myself as more creative than anything else, and creativity and safety go together. The more safe we feel, the more creative we can be. So, yes, I think it's important to have these conversations, to share our ideas, to, as Greta was saying, again, to, be a little bit all over the place. That's okay. And then see what we can create together. I absolutely believe that by doing small things and staying in the moment, I'm just trying to get from here to there. I'm not going to hurt anybody from here to there. Then I'll worry about what happens from there on. Just make it from here to there. And again, that goes back to what she was saying about doing little things and the domestic sphere, that incrementally not doing harm can lead to a life without a lot of harm in it.
There is a question in the chat also about the cookbook, Melinda Russell's cookbook. There seems to be only one copy that survived the publisher's warehouse fire. Was that at the Schomburg? Do you know
I've
about
only
the?
seen it online. I've never seen the actual cookbook. I've only seen it online. So I'm just so grateful that we have it, because it's a fascinating document. Because again, she tells you in the very beginning pages how these awful things happened to her, and that's how she created this cookbook. So she has this wonderful creative thing that she created, these recipes, this nourishing, gorgeous book from a series of mishaps and right after the Civil War. And it's just so enchanting. It's enchanting.
Have you made any of the recipes?
Not yet.
We should do that.
I should. I
Some
should.
of them are pretty strange. It's fascinating.
Yeah. Or I need some magic oil. I just want to know what that is.
Right? Are there other questions for JoAnne? We probably have time for another one. Does anybody want to ask or write it here in the chat? Yeah, here's a question from Leslie. Do you also feel that in making art or writing poetry, our goal is to ask more questions, questions that perhaps are not being asked, or inviting whoever is engaging with the material for further discussion?
Oh, absolutely. I think that I certainly in my own practice, it's a sense of this is where I can go to play and to be curious and to not know, to have things inform me, to invite people into my space and see what their reactions are and how that sparks something in them or leads to something in me or something that we create together. I find collaboration more and more exciting. I in the last 10 years, working with other artists, it's part of my curatorial practice too, working with Sasha, my curatorial partner, and the things that we can do together, feeding off of each other. We started building that practice because of all the questions that we had and the excitement around being artists at this phase of our careers. And it wasn't what we thought it would be like. We thought we would be slowing down, or a lot of our work would be behind us. But we found that actually working collaboratively was very freeing and allowed us to, in a safe space and with other artists, to ask questions and to have, it's almost like putting the work up, it becomes a series of not positions, but of questions all in a row on the walls. Very beautiful, beautiful questions. So yes, I think that art, poetry, music, all of those things are ways to graciously open oneself up to the world and see what happens. So yes.
Thank you, JoAnne, for your answers, your graciousness, your sharing your time, your sharing your work. It's been a real honor to help you bring this book into the world. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And yeah, I hope you'll be in touch.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you everyone for listening.
All right. Have a good day.